And now back to the latest Paralympics update. Israeli athletes continuing to perform tremendously at the 2020 Summer Games in Tokyo. The delegation is earning 7 medals in as many days, 4 gold, 2 silver, and a bronze. The only problem is that some are claiming the competition is not as fair as it may appear. In fact, some critics, including world-class athletes, are even opting not to compete altogether, arguing that the disability categories in which the athletes are divided are, quote, unfair, unscientific, and highly susceptible to cheating. Here to respond, live from the Games in Japan, Davidah Koseff, head of classifications for both the Israeli Paralympic Committee and the Israel Sports Association for the Disabled. Davidah, thank you very much for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit about the categorizations themselves, how they work, and how big of a gap between the different types of disabilities in the competitions there really are?
Okay, well, for those who don't know, classification is what makes Paralympic sport so very special. And it's a way of making a fair field of play for athletes with very, very varying forms of disability and impairments. And every sport discipline has to decide how they're going to classify their athletes, what kind of impairments they're going to include. I know at the moment swimming and athletics is very hot on the news because of the French athlete who was reported as not coming to the Games in Tokyo because of unfair classification. Classification is a very difficult issue. It is as evidence-based and as scientific as it possibly can be. Swimming particularly is a very difficult field to classify because all different impairments are included and there are very many classes. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to create a fair field of play where on the one hand, you have people with similar kinds of impairments competing against one another. On the other hand, you want to make the competition interesting. And so you have to limit the number of classes that you have in each particular sport. Otherwise, the competition would go on and on and on forever. If you think about athletics and swimming, where they have so many different races and so many different classes, and you're trying to squish it all into 2 weeks. So yes, there are questions, but I think the claims of the athletes are not 100% correct. The classification committee of the International Paralympic Committee is constantly reevaluating classification, trying to make it as evidence-based as we can. There is research being done all the time in the different fields. And at the moment, the IPC is starting to reevaluate the code and see where we can make improvements. It's a flowing thing. It's not something that's once it's decided, that's the way it is. It's constantly changing. And swimming in particular is one of the few disciplines where every 2 years, very many of the athletes are reevaluated to make sure that they are in the right class. Because you're trying to group athletes together, you do have classes, especially in the lower, in the more difficult disabilities, where you might have quite a variation between the very most able-bodied in that class and the least able-bodied. And so some people do fall a little bit on the border between two different classes.
All right, well, falling on the border, I'm sorry to cut you off. Falling on the border is I think, okay. is a legitimate, yeah, it's okay. And I think that there's a legitimate argument to be had there on which category, you know, this or that, somebody might fall. But I want to talk about the rumors of cheating because there are rumors, and I don't, you know, these are allegations. There are allegations that athletes have cheated the system by doing things such as taking hot showers, rolling in the snow, or bandaging their limbs to appear to have more limitations than they actually have. Is this true? And if so, what kind of implications might this have on the sport?
I won't say that cheating never happens, but it's very, very difficult to cheat the system because athletes are evaluated by testing them in various areas such as range of motion or muscle strength or movement disorders or visual impairment. And then they are evaluated in field of play. So even if an athlete is going to do something to maybe try and skew the testing, the minute an athlete gets into competition, they're going to do whatever they can to win the competition. And it's very, very difficult to cheat while you're actually competing because you're going to lose. There are very, very serious repercussions against athletes for intentional misrepresentation, and it is something that is evaluated all the time. There are classifiers at all the top level of competitions all the time, watching athletes and making sure that what they saw in the last competition is what they sing in this competition. It's not that once an athlete is classified, that's the end of that. They are always watched. They're also watched in their daily life. You know, we
Wow.
look at them when they go and eat and when they're walking around the games. It's very, very difficult to cheat the system.
Wow. All right.
And the repercussions are very strict. Athletes, it's like doping. Cheating
Sure.
in classification is considered as seriously as doping, and the repercussions are as serious.
Wow. All right. Well, I think that may or may not put this issue to bed for some people, but of course, not everyone's ever going to be happy with everything. Davidah Koseff, thank you so much for joining us. Always.
You're welcome. Hello from Tokyo.
Good luck.
Thank you very much.